Hi there, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Jackie, and today I'm going to show you an art project that I call Standing in the Moonlight. Now this is a mixed media project. It involves some fabric art and some sea glass art. So what I'm going to show you how to make are little cards kind of like this one. This is 4 inches by 5 inches. The one we're doing today is going to be 4 inches by 6 inches. And I'm going to show you how you can make a fabric art card and then embellish it with a sea glass and nakshak. And they're just sweet. And I'm going to show you 4 of them. I'm going to demo it to you on a purple one, kind of like this one. And then I'm also going to show you a blue one, an orange one, and a pink and yellow one. So I hope you really enjoy this. I think the colors will be really cheerful and it should be lots of fun. So I've been doing a number of moon pieces because I just love the moon. I love looking at the moon. The moon when you're at the beach is spectacular. So I've done some sea glass pieces like this one that's only sea glass. And I've done a number of art cards that have moons on them. So at the end of this video, I'll show you a slideshow with all my moon pieces. And it kind of harkens back to what I was talking about with working in a series. So this would be my moon series. So I really hope you enjoy this one. It should be lots of fun. So here's an art card that I've already made, and it is 4 inches by 5 inches. So today we're going to do 4 inches by 6 inches, so it'll be another inch taller. But it's the same idea. I want to do some striped fabric on the background, or fabric stripped on the background. It's not striped, it's plain fabric. And then I want to embellish it with some beads and some embroidery. And I want to add a sea glass and nakshak. So I'm going to demo this to you on a purple card. So I'll show you everything you need, and I'll put a list of the materials in the description down below so you can get all the materials together, because that's the first thing you need to do. So first of all, I took this is iron-on Pellon. It's fairly thick, and I cut a piece of that 4 inches by 6 inches. And I have a piece of purple fabric cut a little bit bigger than 4 inches by 6 inches for the backing. So that's going to be the back of my card. And then I have a piece of batting, which is a little bit bigger than 4 inches by 6 inches. And then it's just strips of fabric. So I took some purple strips of fabric. I have a little piece of organza here to put over this strip of white, make it a bit shimmery. And then I just arrange some purple strips of fabric onto my batting, like this. And then the other materials I need, I have some purple yarn. I'm going to use that for couching. I have some purple variegated thread to sew this all together. And I have some purple thread and a bobbin to sew the binding around the edge, because I like to have a solid color thread to do the binding. And I have 2 different colored purple embroidery floss, dark purple, light purple, and I have some purple beads. And so then what I've also done is gather up a very similar tray of blue materials, all the same stuff, except in blue color wave, and orange materials, all the same stuff again, except in an orange color wave. And for this one, I have pink and yellow. So these are just to add some variety, and depending on what color you like to work with. I'll demo here, but then I'll show you the variation with 3 other cards. Now the other thing that you're going to need, of course, put this back into my purple tray, is I have some white. This is white that I embroider with. It's kind of like a glossy white thick thread that makes some nice accents, and some white beads, because I like to add some white, and I'll use that probably in all of them. And I have 4 sea glass and nakshaks. So I gathered up my sea glass ahead of time, and these are the sea glass. This is the sea glass I'm going to put on after I finish my cards. So I'm ready to get going. So the first thing I did was I ironed the piece of purple fabric on the back of the pellon and trimmed it. So I did that with the purple one, the orange one, the yellow one, and the blue one. So I have my backs prepared, so I can just set those aside for when I have the tops prepared. So I arranged my purple fabric in strips. I decided to put this piece of organza right over top of the white and that purple strip, just to give it a bit of a shimmery look. And I've taken it over to the sewing machine, and I have put my purple thread into the machine, my plain purple thread, because the first thing I want to do is couch some of the yarn on. And I like doing some couching sometimes for these seams. And I want to couch that piece of purple yarn on right there. So I will do that first. Put it into my machine, and remember that your strips are a little bit bigger than the piece of pellon, so you'll have room for trimming. So I can go right to the edge, but it doesn't have to be super neat along the edge. So to do the couching, I just put the setting on zigzag and do a bit of just a normal stitch along. Now you'll notice that I'm using 5 strips of fabric here. You don't have to use 5. You can use 2 or 3 or 6 or 7. You can use as many strips of fabric as you like. When I get to the end here, I lock my stitch and cut it. Now what I do here, you'll notice I'm not pinning. What I do is every time I go to sew a new strip on, I will line it up by eye. Now I want to coach another strip on down here. So I'm going to try and line that up at the 90-degree angle like this. And I'll just couch again. I find these couched bits of yarn, they help cover the seam, and they also add a little bit of detail and definition. And I'm going to do one more right here. I really like the linear look that you get here, especially because it kind of contrasts with the circles in the moon. And I always make my nunchucks a little bit funky, so they aren't totally lined up. So there, that's all I'm going to do for couching. And remember, you're going to trim this, so don't be too concerned about the edges. So next I want to do some free motion quilting. So I've changed my thread to the variegated thread. I've changed my foot to my free motion foot, and I've changed my stitch to straight stitch because I don't want zigzag stitch here. So I'm just going to do some free motion quilting to add some background to my little card here. I like wavy lines, so that's why I tend to do a lot of free motion here. And I'm going to do this everywhere except on the white. I'm going to leave the white just plain because I like it that way. All right, now I'm just going to give that a really quick press with the iron, and then I'm going to trim it to 4 inches by 6 inches. Okay, so I'm all set to go with some handwork. So I have my backing done, and the main part of my quilt piece here is all quilted and put together and trimmed to 4 inches by 6 inches, so this fits on top of this. But before I attach these two together, I want to do some handwork. So I'll just show you what I did with the other ones. I have the blue one here. Now some variations. See, I have the back, whoops, I got threads everywhere here. So with the blue one, variations. I have 4 strips here instead of 5. And one thing I did decide to do here, I really like the piece of fabric I chose for the top part of it, which would be kind of like the sky. So I decided not to do any quilting on that. So I only did some quilting on the bottom, didn't quilt the whole thing. My orange one, something a little bit different here. I have the orange back here. It is 4 pieces as well instead of 5. And I used this yarn that had these baubles in it. So it just adds a little bit of variety. I did some straight stitches there instead of curvy stitches in the sky. And the pink one is a little bit different again. I did some satin stitch here instead of couching. And this pink ribbony stuff I just sewed on instead of couched. And with my free motion here, I followed the line of the fabric to make those little flowers. So you can do whatever you want. My point is that you can add a lot of variety, not only in color, but in your composition and the way you put things together. So next step is the moons. I love the moons. Now what I do with these, I'll take the back off for now. I like to do 2 moons. So to do my moons, I'm going to need a template to draw the circle. So I have this plastic thing that I use. I can make a bigger one on a bigger piece. I'm going to use the inner one to make a smaller moon. And you don't need to have a template like this. You can use anything round. My second moon I'm going to use, because I like to do 2 moons on this. It's kind of like a moon and a shadow of a moon. I'm going to use the bottom of my spool of thread for this one. So I'm just taking an Eversharp pencil and I'm going to draw 2 intersecting circles here that I'm going to use to make moons. Now I don't worry about using the Eversharp pencil. What I find when I go to fill it in, just the moisture from my hands tends to wash the pencil mark off, and it's covered with the beads and the embroidery floss and everything that I use. And then I'll make a small moon. I'm just using this. Whoops. That was a mistake. I went too close to the edge. I'll have to rub that bit of a line off. You don't want to go too close to the edge, because if your embroidery or your beads are too close to the edge, you'll cover them up when you go to do your binding around the edge. So I just drew my 2 circles. So there you go. I have my 2 circles drawn with the pencil. And now to make the moons, I like to use French knots and beading. So I have put some dark purple embroidery floss on in my needle here, and I'm going to do some French knots. And these I'm going to pull them tight so they're tiny French knots. And I'm going to go on the pencil line all the way around. So I'll do that slower to show you what I do. Poke the needle through right on the line, and then I take the needle like this. I wrap it around the needle 3 times, poke the needle back into the same hole. This is in case you aren't familiar with how to do French knots. Maybe you do French knots tons of times, and this is easy for you. Pull the needle through, and then just pull it tight. I did one of these projects not too long ago where I did really loose French knots, because that's what worked with that design. With this design, it's tight little French knots that work in my mind, because I want to form the outline of the moon with the dark purple embroidery French knots. Sometimes when I'm looking at things like this, once I finish them, I might have a hard time. From a distance, you're not really sure if it's a French knot or it's a bead. But to me, that's interesting. Anything that draws a person in to make them look a little closer is interesting. I love the way this dark embroidery floss looks different against all the different fabrics. So it really stands out against the white, but then it looks really nice against the light purple as well. So you can see how these French knots in a circle really create a nice moon image. So last one to tie it all together. And there you go, a smaller circle. So with that one, I'm going to use this white embroidery floss, and this stuff has a bit of a shimmer to it. I quite like it. So I'm going to just start again on my second pencil line circle and do tight French knots again. This embroidery floss is a little bit thicker, but I really like to use it because it has a bit of a shimmer to it. So it's harder to get the knots tiny and tight, but that's all right. I'm still going to use it. And if the knots are a little bit bigger, it'll still give you that circular shape. So this white is standing out against the purple very nicely. And you can see now how I have these two circles. So to me, it's the moon and the shadow of the moon. It's just kind of fanciful, so it doesn't have to look exactly like the moon. I just love these circular shapes. So there, two moons. This is starting to take shape. If you're doing this on a bigger piece, you could do as many repetitions around the circle as you like. So for me, I want to put some beads. So I have my purple beads. I have some bright purple beads here that I'm going to do a circle of beads all the way around. Just put a few on the table here. The inside of my white moon. I don't know about you, but I just love doing this handwork. I find I can sit and do this. My husband likes to watch TV in the evening, and I find TV's interesting, but if I'm not doing something with my hands, I'll get really bored. So I always have my projects on the go as we're sitting there watching whatever show we're watching. A lot of times he watches sports, and sports is, I follow it, but it's not, I'm not as into it as he is. So having some handwork to work on while all this stuff is on TV is really fun for me. So I'm going to do this row of purple beads all the way along the inside of the white moon. All right, those beads really add an element of sparkle to that moon. And now I've got some other pale purple beads that I'm going to put around the inside of the other moon. And every little bit just adds a bit more interest. These little beads are kind of fussy. They're seed beads, and they're very tiny. They can get away from you pretty easy. I'd say when the vacuum gets run around here, quite a few of them go up in the vacuum because they fall on the floor. The other day I dropped an entire package of beads, and they were 4 different colors of blue, and they went absolutely everywhere. They made a mess. So there, I finished that row of beads around there, and I've decided that this big moon needs one more layer around the outside. So I was just debating about whether to use these tiny white beads or to use my pale embroidery floss. I think the embroidery floss is going to do the trick. Sometimes a third layer around those moons with little glass white beads can really work nicely, but I'm going to try the embroidery floss. You know, when you're kind of debating about which thing to use, you can always try it and things come undone, right? Like if I put in a few of these French knots and I decide, no, I think I think the beads are going to work better, no problem. I'll just pull the French knots out and put the beads in. So I'm really happy with that row of French knots all the way around that moon. I think it really completes the moon. So those are good. So just a few more tiny details. One of the things that I like to add a few of here are these clear bugle beads. Not very many, just a very few, because these are really good to catch the light. So if I just add a few up here in the sky, this purple sky, you know, you never get totally purple in really in nature, but there's always or often a little bit of purple in the sky, especially around sunset time. So that's why I wanted to make a purple one. So just a few of these bugle beads will catch the light and add a little bit of interest. Little details like this take next to no time to do. And they're so effective that it's well worth the few seconds that you take to just add a few more little elements here. And then this part down here, I would consider part of the water. These are beach scenes, abstract, but yet in my mind, beach. I think that's enough of these. Now this area here, I want to leave kind of blank because I know that's where I'm going to be putting my inukshuk. But on the other side here, I'm just going to use a little bit more embroidery floss to put some grass, because this to me is the grass in the foreground grass. Now the dark doesn't show up very well against that dark fabric, but the light will. I'm just going to use some of this light purple to add a few more tufts of grass, and these will be very visible. So I think that's all that needs. So now I'm going to go ahead and do some more elements on the orange piece, the blue piece, and the pink and yellow piece. And I'll get back to you with what I come up with there and show you how you can take a design like this and do some variations on it. Variations on a theme. So I decided I wanted to do a tiny bit more on my purple background. I added a row of beads right here, a row of French knots right here, and I put some beads on top of the tufts of grass here. And I think that's enough for that one. So to show you some variations, here's my yellow and pink one. One thing I did here was I added a bunch of pink beads right there in the center flower. That one's kind of pretty, very fanciful. And here's my orange one. One thing that's different on the orange one, I left the center here bare because I plan to put the inukshuk in the center, whereas on this one I plan to put it off to the right, and in this one off to the left. And on the blue one, because the bottom of my blue one is all water, I had to build something for the inukshuk to stand on. So I used the embroidery floss to make a little bank here, and a few other little bits out in the water. So you can do as much or as little as you want to in these backgrounds. It's entirely up to you. So now I'm ready to sew the back and the front together. So you take your back and your front, put them together, get rid of any extra threads, and make sure that they fit just perfectly. So if you have any loose threads that are sticking out like that, pull them off, or take your scissors and snip, just to make sure you won't have any loose threads sticking out around on your binding. So I'm at my machine. I have put my walking foot on. I've changed my stitch to zigzag stitch. I've put my stitch length on the minimum stitch length, and maximum stitch width, depending on your machine. I won't give you the exact numbers because everybody's machine is different. And now I'm going to sew all the way around the edge, doing what's called a satin stitch or a zigzag, and it makes a really nice binding all the way around, and it sews your front to your back. And there you go. I'm ready for the sea glass. So to glue on my sea glass, I use this Quick Seal Kitchen and Bath Adhesive Caulking, clear silicone. It goes on white and dries clear, works great on fabric. So I usually use 6 pieces of sea glass for an inkshuck. Not always, sometimes I make them a bit different. But for these ones, I'm using 6 pieces. So I have 2 pieces for the legs and feet, or the feet. I have 1 piece for the body, and 2 for the arm, and 1 for the head. And this is fairly straightforward. Putting on my inkshuck. Doesn't take very long. There. That's the sea glass bit. And then I'll let that set for a bit, and it will be ready to give as a gift for a card. Now with these fabric backings, I'm going to be really careful here, probably have to adjust that. If you turn them around, the fabric back, you can write on the back. So I always sign my name, and then if I'm giving it to somebody, I can write them a note, because I often give these to people for gifts. There you have it, Standing in the Moonlight, and variations on a theme. I have my pink and yellow one, my orange one, and my blue one. So thanks so much for joining me for this video. Stay tuned, I'll show you a slideshow of my entire moon series. And until next time, I hope you make it to the beach and happy sea glass hunting.